Hello everyone, and welcome to this session. The title is Past is Always Present. This is a panel discussion on writing of history. So we will be discussing several dimensions and challenges of history writing. So in the panel today is Mr. Vikram Sampath. So he's a famous historian, but you'll be surprised that he was a student of mathematics, and later on he did his doctorate in music science. So we welcome Vikram Sampath ji. So he has been He was awarded the Sahitya Academy First Yuva Puraskar in English Literature and the ARSC International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York. Thank you, Vikram ji. In our panel is Siddharth Shankar Gautam ji. Siddharth ji is a journalist. He has written 12 books. He works with an organization, Ekal Abhiyan, which is dedicated to the upliftment of tribals across India. They have several chapters across the world, including one in Paris. So welcome, Siddharth ji. And I also welcome Mr. Douglas Graziax. So thank you, sir. Douglas ji has written a book on the Indian soldiers, those who fought alongside French soldiers in the World War I. So he has been to Punjab also regarding the launch of his book. So I can say that, sir, you are an unofficial ambassador of the relations between India and France. Myself is Vinay Kumar Singh. I'm an author. I basically write on national security issues and more focused on the internal security issues. So let's open the discussion now. So when we talk about history, we think that it's only related to past. But yes, history is concerned with past. But it is conducted in the present. And it shapes the future. So it's very important how you write the history despite all the odds and challenges. Every historian, they have its own struggle in writing, and it can be said that historian is like a detective who is investigating history, like the detective investigating crime. So, my first question is with Mr. Vikram Sampath ji, that what are the general challenges when it comes to history writing? What are the basic challenges? Your background was of a mathematician and a non-historian, but you write in history and you are an acclaimed historian across the world. So what are the basic challenges you face?
Thank you, Binayji. The last session of the book fair and that too after lunch to discuss history, I do hope we can hold the attention of all the esteemed audience members. What you said was very relevant, that, what George Orwell had also said. He who controls the past controls the future. So I think that is one reason why history becomes a live battlefield, a very, very contested, discipline, where people want to, gain control over the narrative, because that shapes not only our identity as a nation, as a people, but also as a civilization. So in the case of India too, this contestation is all the time rife. And we see that in manifesting all the time in India. Now, when you talk about the challenges, general challenges about writing about history, I would say there are three main paradoxes when it comes to history writing. The first one is the fact that the past, though the title of this session is different, the past is not in the present. So unlike physical sciences and chemistry and physics and others, where you can see the phenomenon occurring in front of you, here things have happened thousands of centuries before you're actually writing about it. So the past is not present there, so to say, for your evaluation, for your live experience. The second challenge or the limitation of the discipline is the fact that the sources that are available to reconstruct that past, whether it is archaeological, excavations, epigraphic inscriptions, textual sources, whatever they be it, they are all fragmented. They are either incomplete, they have been destroyed over several centuries, or they come with their own biases. So suppose you have a court historian writing the biography of his king, then obviously he would come with his own set of biases. He can't be completely objective about his patron whom he's writing about. So the sources themselves are coming with their inherent mediations, their inherent biases. The third challenge becomes the biases that come with the person who is reading those sources, the modern day historian, whose ideological biases, their lack of knowledge, their capacities or otherwise. So if you see the past not being present, the sources being highly fragmented, and lastly, the biases of the modern historian, all these contribute to the fact that this comes through as an extremely mediated discipline. And therefore, there's that famous saying that there is nothing absolute when it comes to history. There's a famous American historian who said, every work of history is an interim report. It is constantly available for revision, retelling, reinterpretation, because what happened in the past is not absolute. Often I quote this poem, which we read as children, of the blind man and the elephant. There was one elephant in the room, and many blind men were touching different parts of the elephant. And when they were asked, how does the elephant look? Someone said it feels to him like the trunk. Someone felt it's a thin little piece of the tail. Someone thought it is broad like the body of the elephant. Someone said it is very sharp like the tusk of the elephant. They were all right, correct in their own perspectives, but they were all wrong as well, because the elephant was the sum of the parts of all the descriptions that these people were giving of the elephant. To me, history writing is very similar, where all of us historians are blind men who are touching different parts of that elephant, and depending on what we see, what the biases that are inherent, we kind of describe the elephant in the way we want to. And particularly when it comes to India, the colonial biases, the colonial hangover, considering we've been under colonial rule for such a long time, it colors our understanding of history. It also colors our nature of how we understand our past. Sir John Strachey, the British civil administrator in the 1880s, he used to be in charge of training all the young Imperial Civil Services, ICS officers. And he would say, the first and most important thing to know about India is that there is not and there never was an India. So constantly, the thought that is ingrained into the minds of even educated Indians is that we were not even a nation. the Indian nation is a ahistorical entity, something that has been welded together, hammered together in a very unnatural fashion due to the British. If the British did not come, we would all be fighting with each other, many princely states, all at war with each other, not understanding the fundamental civilizational unity that India has as a culture, which predates the Constitution of India or even British imperialism. Just one example of the Vishnu Purana, which describes the landmass of India itself. Uttaram yat samudrasya himadrashchaiva dakshinam varshatad bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. You know, the entire landmass south of the Himalayas and north of the oceans is the Varsha. The country is known as Bharat, and its children are called Bharatiyas. So there was a very, very strong Indic vision of what the nation is, what our civilization is, what its past is. But unfortunately, due to these several centuries of colonial hangover, as I said, a lot of educated Indians also believe that the British gave us everything. They gave us English education, they gave us railways, they gave us culture, they gave us, hospitals, modern schools, education, all of that. And so we forget this fundamental civilizational nature of our country, and that also colors the way we look at our own past.
Vikramji, you just talked about bias. And suppose a scientist, he's biased. So what he will do with his lab? Suppose a doctor is biased. So what he is going to do with his patient? So the same thing, if a historian is biased, so what kind of writing he is going to produce? Yeah.
As I said, every work of history comes with that bias. You cannot, so that is why no work is an absolute work of history. Every historian needs to have that humility, saying mine is not the ultimate word in this subject. So I have recently, penned these 2 volumes on Savarkar, spent 5 long years to write it. But it is not the final word. As that famous Indic thought goes, neti, neti. This is not the final word at all. Tomorrow someone else here may do much better research than me. They may find better documents, better archival material, and that would lead to my books just being flung out of the window and being consigned to the dustbins of history. I hope not, but there is a possibility of that happening. So I think every historian needs to have that humility that our works, as I said earlier, every work of history is an interim report. It's just a report that is work in progress. Someone else can always come and change it. But the problem is most historians become so, they have so much of a hold over the discipline that they feel what they have said is the ultimate truth. And that is what leads to all the problems in this discipline, unfortunately.
These are kind words from a humble historian, which is rare, I think. सिद्धार्थ जी, आपसे एक सवाल है. आप पत्रकारिता में लंबे समय रहे, कई अखबारों में काम किया. आप वर्तमान पर भी लिखते हैं और इतिहास पर भी लिखा है आपने. इतिहास लेखन में भारतीय परिप्रेक्ष्य में आपके विचार क्या हैं?
सभी को नमस्कार.
एक मिनट.
सबसे पहली बात तो
Monsieur Siddharth, donc vous êtes journaliste, vous écrivez à la fois sur les sujets d'aujourd'hui, mais également sur l'histoire. Donc j'aimerais savoir vos idées, votre opinion sur ce qui a été dit concernant l'histoire et les historiens.
सभी को नमस्कार. सबसे पहले तो इतिहास उनका होता है जो नष्ट हो जाते हैं. सत्य, शाश्वत और सनातन धारा का इतिहास नहीं होता, वो अविरल बहती है और दुनिया को इतिहास बनाती है. मैं राम की उस भूमि से हूँ जिसने सत्य और परिवार प्रबोधन का मंत्र पूरी दुनिया को दिया. कृष्ण की उस धरा से हूँ जिन्होंने गीता का ज्ञान दिया. स्वामी विवेकानंद की उस धरा से हूँ जिन्होंने वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की भावना कही. मैं सावरकर की उस धरा से हूँ जिन्होंने हिंदुत्व को परिभाषित किया. मैं भगत सिंह की उस धरा से हूँ जिन्होंने राष्ट्रभक्ति को परिभाषित किया. गुरु नानक से लेकर गौतम बुद्ध तक शांति का पाठ पढ़ाने वाले मैं कितने नाम लूँ, असंख्य नाम हैं. यदि भारत ने शून्य नहीं दिया होता तो आज दुनिया चांद पर पहुंच पाती क्या? ये हमारा इतिहास नहीं है, ये हमारा गौरव है। और जब हम बात करते हैं इतिहास की, तो इतिहास लेखन एक ऐसा जटिल प्रश्न बनकर आता है कि आप इतिहास को किस तरह से परिभाषित करते हैं वो महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है। कई चीज़ें ऐसी होती हैं कि आपको दूसरों से सुन के लिखनी पड़ती हैं, क्योंकि आप उस समय आपका जन्म नहीं हुआ होता। जब आप जिस कालखंड में आप जन्म ही नहीं लिए, उस कालखंड के बारे में आपको कैसे पता होगा? जब वो जनश्रुतियाँ आपके पास तक आती हैं, तब तक उनमें इतने विकार आ जाते हैं कि आप सच्चे अर्थों में इतिहास लेखन कर ही नहीं सकते। आज हमारा इतिहास क्या है? वेद हैं, पुराण हैं, उपनिषद हैं, चरक, सुश्रुत, पतंजलि हैं, जिन्होंने योग और वेदांत को आगे बढ़ाया, पूरी दुनिया में दिया। ये हमारा इतिहास, और ये वास्तविक इतिहास है जो आज पूरी दुनिया जिस पर चल रही है।
Donc, je vais commencer à dire que l'histoire, c'est les gens qui sont morts, en fait. Or, la vérité, c'est absolu. La vérité n'a pas l'histoire. Il est toujours vivant. Et donc, je viens d'un terre qui a eu des sages de Guru Nanak jusqu'à Gautam Buddha qui ont donné le message de paix et qui ont également donné des grands personnages. Si je commence à citer tous les noms, la liste sera très longue. Donc, ce qu'on raconte de l'Inde, ce n'est pas notre histoire. Aujourd'hui, en fait, c'est notre fierté. Mais la question que je me pose, c'est comment on définit l'histoire? C'est quoi l'histoire, en fait? Parce qu'on a entendu certaines choses, certains historiens qui sont basés sur les entretiens, sur les témoignages, mais ces faits sont modifiés de bouche à oreille quand ils parlent d'une personne chez les autres. Donc, l'important de baser sur les sources qui sont là depuis très longtemps, par exemple les Védas, les Puranas, c'est ça notre vraie histoire.
Mr. Douglas, you have written a book. I can say it's a research document of an incident which is almost a century old. Definitely you must have gone through the archives, the libraries. You can hear me? I can't hear you. Achha. Definitely you must have gone through the archives, the libraries for your reference. But I want to ask you a different question. In India, when it comes to history writing, there is a challenge. The challenge is that when you talk about the personalities of 100 years back or 200 years back, you can refer to the archives, you can refer to the libraries, you can refer to some books, but there are several heroes in India, those who fall in the category of, the one must discuss category these days is unsung heroes. But they don't fall in the category of unsung heroes. They are unclaimed heroes. 300 years, 400 years back. For an example, one lady warrior I am quoting, she was a tribal Urao queen. Her name was Singi Dei. To Singi Dei, she defeated Shershah Suri, not once, twice, but thrice. And she defeated Shershah Suri after 1539. When Shershah Suri defeated Humayun in the Battle of Chausa. So again the question is that the references or these stories, they are nowhere in any library or in any archive, but they are into the Indian folk tales. And what is a folk tale? In Indian context, I am telling you, that is just not a story that has passed down through generations mainly by telling, but it is a science of preserving knowledge in India. And especially this science was developed when the knowledge centers, the premium knowledge centers in India, they were demolished, like Taxila and Nalanda. So how could we write about those heroes, those who don't have any reference in libraries, in archives, they are in the folk tales, But again, in the Indian context, the folk tales are science. It is a science of storytelling. So how do we overcome this challenge, sir?
Bon, je voudrais d'abord te remercier, l'ambassade de l'Inde et le service du livre ici de l'Inde pour organiser ce salon du livre. C'est la première fois que je participe hein, et c'est l'ambassadeur qui nous a invités et on est très reconnaissant d'être là aujourd'hui. En ce qui concerne le sujet, il faut savoir, si vous voulez, que nous sommes l'association qui parle des anciens comptoirs français. Donc ça veut dire, si vous voulez, qu'il y a tout un aspect historique. Quand on parle de l'histoire, il faut remonter, si vous voulez, au passé, notamment, par exemple, les Britanniques, les Portugais, les Hollandais, etc., sont venus en Inde dans le cadre, si vous voulez, de la recherche des épices. Ça a été la première intervention qui s'est transformée plus tard en un aspect colonialisme. Donc il ne faut pas séparer, si vous voulez, le colonialisme des origines de l'arrivée des Occidentaux en Inde. Donc quand la France est arrivée en Inde, c'est en 1664, après les Britanniques, après les Portugais. Donc ça a été la recherche des épices. Alors maintenant, pour voir comment on conserve les archives qui permettent de connaître un peu le passé, c'est quelque chose de très compliqué. Très compliqué parce que si vous remontez un peu aux origines de l'Inde, parce que là nous fêtons le 75e anniversaire de l'Union indienne, donc c'est quelque chose de nouveau. 75 ans, c'est pas beaucoup par rapport au millénaire de l'importance de l'Inde. Donc si vous voulez, pour avoir des informations sur ce qui s'est passé il y a 2000 ans, 3000 ans, 4000 ans, vous aurez simplement des idées, mais pas quelque chose de précis, quelque chose de vrai. Quand on voit les recherches qui ont été faites sur l'Indus, dans la vallée de l'Indus, pour parler des hindous, la religion, comment on a découvert des éléments qui permettent de dire comment cette religion s'est installée, qui a participé au développement de cette culture, c'est très difficile. Chacun a des idées qui ne sont pas du tout correctes peut-être et qui ne rentrent pas vraiment dans un cadre. Après, il y a eu... Ça a été la première période. Quand on parle de la deuxième période, c'est l'Empire britannique des Indes. Là, vous avez des archives qui sont peut-être orientées, parce que chaque parti avait ses idées, son idéologie, et c'était toujours difficile de bien interpréter les choses. Bon, ce qu'on peut parler, par exemple, c'est la révolte des Sipahis. Ça a été un événement important en 1857. On en parle très peu. Nobody is speaking about 1857. That is also, we have to notice. Donc, si vous voulez, le travail que nous avons fait sur la Première Guerre mondiale, c'est un travail qui est très difficile parce que nous n'avons pas d'archives. Quand on a été au service de l'armée de France, ils n'avaient pas d'archives sur les soldats indiens qui ont combattu en France, ce qui est quand même un peu anormal. Comment?
Je peux interpréter en anglais?
Ah oui, pardon. Oui.
I would like to thank the ambassador from India here and the book services who invited me here. This is the first time I attend the Salon du Livre, and I'm very grateful for this. I am here as a representative of the Association of former French comptoirs in India, and what we do is we deal with history. What we must remember is that it all started with spices. Spices were the reasons why Portuguese and then the British and the Dutch came to India. That was the first reason, and that's what turned into colonialism, and that was only a second step. When France arrived in India, it was in 1664, and this was only taking place after the English, the Brits and the Portuguese settled in India. As to the subject at hand, how to better conserve, how to better maintain archives, it's a very very complicated subject. We are here on the brink of celebrating India's 75th birthday, and this 75 years is not much, especially when compared with the millennia of Indian history. And when you look at 2,000 years, 3,000, 4,000 years old archives, or you don't have any idea what happened at the time. And this is the reason, the research that was carried out on the Indus, on how the Hindu religion came to be, are very difficult. Everyone has their own ideas. There are no proper evidence of what history was at the time, and it makes it very difficult to fit into one framework. The second period was when the Brits occupied India, and that's when archives became available. But archives themselves are biased. They are full of prejudice, and this makes it very difficult to interpret. To give you an example, very little is being said about the Sipai revolution in 1857. Nobody talks about this. So our work in my association is to look at this, the First World War, and let me say it's extremely difficult to have access to proper archives dealing with this, because when we asked the French army services, they didn't have anything to give us.
So, can I speak a little more? Bon, donc ce que je voudrais vous dire, si vous voulez, les archives, nous ne les avons pas trouvées en France. On les a trouvées en Grande-Bretagne. On les a trouvées auprès des Allemands. Parce que, si vous voulez, il y a beaucoup d'Indiens qui ont été faits prisonniers par les Allemands à l'époque. Donc j'ai été en Allemagne, on a discuté avec certaines personnes qui nous ont donné certains éléments d'information. Après, en Angleterre, on a été à Londres. Et là, effectivement, à Londres, there is many archives in London, but not in France. Donc après Londres, on a également vu un peu au niveau de l'Inde. Au niveau de l'ambassade de l'Inde, on n'a pas eu vraiment trop de précision dessus. Parce que c'est pareil, c'était une armée qui était contrôlée par les Britanniques. Donc il n'y avait pas d'autorité indienne qui pouvait être informée. Les Britanniques n'informaient certainement pas les Indiens ou l'armée indienne. Il n'y avait pas d'armée précise. Donc c'était, si vous voulez, très difficile pour l'Inde d'avoir des archives. Alors voilà, si vous voulez, le livre que nous avons fait, c'est le seul livre qui a été publié en France sur les soldats indiens. Personne n'avait fait de recherches et n'avait parlé que plus de 100 000 soldats indiens sont venus se battre en France. Que sur les 100 000 soldats, il y a eu 10 000 morts, ce qui est quand même important. Donc si vous allez même au niveau de l'Inde, au départ avec les Britanniques, il n'y a jamais eu de monument pour rendre hommage aux soldats indiens qui sont morts dans la Première Guerre mondiale. Après, on a construit à Delhi la Grande Arche, où là, on parle des soldats indiens. Mais, si vous voulez, il n'y a pas eu de relation entre les Britanniques et les Indiens. C'était quelque chose de fermé, puisque c'était la colonisation. Donc, par contre, le travail qu'on a fait, c'est un travail qui a été très remarqué par tout le monde. Nous avons participé à tous les salons de tourisme de France pendant 6 ans. Nous avons été agréés par le ministère de la Défense pour le livre, pour la conférence que je fais et pour les documents que nous avons. Nous avons fait une exposition de kakémonos. On a eu près de 30 kakémonos qu'on promène dans toute la France. Donc maintenant, les Français savent qu'il y a des Indiens qui sont venus se battre. Parce que les Français ne connaissaient rien. Moi, je vois, quand on parlait avec les Français, ils étaient complètement surpris d'apprendre que des Indiens sont morts pour nous. Donc c'est ça, si vous voulez, que nous avons voulu faire comme travail. Et je crois que l'ambassade ici est reconnaissante du travail que nous avons fait sur ce thème. Voilà.
So what I wanted to say is that we didn't have access to any archive in France. And then we decided to go to London. We had access to some archives in Germany because some of the prisoners were held in Germany. But then we went to London. And then we went to India. And it was very difficult to come by any precise information. At the time, the army was under British rule, under British control. And they didn't share any information with India, meaning that India struggled to even build archives related to the First World War. The only So we came up with this book. We wrote this book, which was the only publication in France, looking at the fate of Indian soldiers. 100,000 Indian soldiers came to fight here in France, including 10,000 who died. And there was not a single monument to honor the memory of the soldiers. There was obviously the great arch that was built in Delhi, but there was nothing here. And there was no relationship between Brits and Indians at the time. So what we did was we created this book, we traveled around during tourist events, and we were accredited by the French government, which made it possible for me to be here today. We have developed 30 testimonials, we have toured France, and we have raised awareness among French people. These people had no idea that there were even Indian soldiers fighting under a French flag here. So they were very surprised to learn about this, to learn about the number of forces who died, and I believe this is what I'm trying to do.
We again thank you, sir, because really your book is an invaluable documentation about history, and it was really tough. We can understand that how much effort you had to put in to get the research done. But my question is with Vikram Sampath ji, that is what really, it was really like that, just for the sake of taste buds, the Britishers or the Europe that was attracted towards India, means just for the spices. Because if it was just for the spices, there must not have been that kind of suffering. We have suffered a lot. We have been tortured a lot. We have been destroyed a lot. So it was just simply for the spices, for the taste buds.
Yeah, I would perhaps slightly disagree there, that while the Europeans, of course, came in the 14th, 15th century, looking for trade opportunities, looking for spices, looking for various other treasures that India had to offer, had their East India companies established, whether it was the Dutch, the French, the British, the Portuguese, and others. We had several waves of colonialism and invasions before that. We cannot forget that aspect of our past. Right from, say, the Greek invasions of Alexander to the Shakas, the Hunas, and all of those, the Kushanas and others who attacked our northwest frontier provinces, right from several years BC to almost 600, 700 years of Islamic conquest of India. How can we brush that under the carpet and say that this never happened? And these were not only for the taste buds, as you said. It also had a lot of theological, driving forces, right from the first Arab invasion that we had of Sindh in the 8th century. We started actually from the 7th century, but finally they captured Sindh, and Raja Dahar fell to the Arabs and Muhammad bin Qasim. But after that, you've had a series of attacks, whether it is of the Turks, the Mongols, the Timurid Empire, who later became the Mughals, the 525 years of the Delhi Sultanate that was established. In that time, the Hindu Kush mountains. What does the meaning of Hindu Kush mean? It's a skull of the Hindus, the massacre of Hindus, which happened in that part of the world. And Hindu here doesn't refer to the religion per se. It's anybody who lived in in Hindustan, because Al-Hind was how they looked at this entire landmass to the other side of the Indus River. Historian K.S. Lal mentions that between 1000 CE and 1525 CE, the population of the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, fell by 8 to 9 crores. 8 to 9 crore people were massacred. So these were not just, for trading and so on. These were very great conquests that happened. American historian Will Durant called the Islamic conquest of India as one of the bloodiest stories in human history. Not just Indian history, but human history. So these stories of Indian genocide and Holocaust, if I can use that term, are very, very important. They're very uncomfortable chapters of Indian history, but nonetheless, they have to be spoken about very openly without any kind of, trying to brush things under the carpet. Also, the whole idea that, 1857, we've been talking about it since a very long time. In fact, the character I have written about, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, was the one who gave this Sepoy mutiny. The word was changed into the first war of Indian independence. He stayed in Britain for 2 years. For 5 years he was in London, but 2 years he spent doing a lot of primary research at the British archives, using the British documents to rewrite Indian history from the Indian perspective. Because, as I said, every history has multiple perspectives. The Indian perspective had to be put forward, and Savarkar did just that. And to call that Sepoy mutiny, it was shown in a disparaging way that it was just a small little mutiny of few people who threw, because there was a beef lard and pork and all that in the cartridges, they started firing at the soldiers. But Savarkar said, no, this was much more. It was a revolution. It was called the first war of Indian independence. So to elevate that to such a primal importance, this was done way back in 1909, more than 113, 14 years ago. So I think there is an acknowledgement of the fact that there are other strains of history and particularly of our freedom struggle, and these have always been a part of Indian historiography.
Vikramji and Mr. Douglas, so you just talked about the 1857. So again, the main problem what, we face related to the 1857 incident is that what has been done by the Britishers. The historians were, again, either they were Britishers or they were court historians. So not to write, what not to write and what to write. So they definitely have not written what the misdeeds they have done, what the cruelty they have done. One example I am quoting you, sir, and here the challenge is also, I want your view on that. That for example, you take a lady, her name was Ajijan Bai. She was a courtesan. I am referring to a lady warrior, a lady revolutionary of 1857. Her name was Ajijan Bai. She was a prostitute. She was a courtesan. But if you look at her contribution, she was the main instrument which led to the siege of Kanpur cantonment. And there were several other team members. She was a team member of Nana Sahab. I can put Nana Sahab into the unsung heroes. The team member was Nawab Samsuddin. I will put Nawab Samsuddin and both Ajijan Bai into the unclaimed heroes category. So how to write history? If I want to write history about Ajijan Bai, so nothing much is available in books, in archives, in libraries. It is into the folk tales. It is into the stories of India. And again, if you write something based on the folk tales, so for me as an Indian, it is science, as I said. That is a science of preserving knowledge. But if I write something just based on folk tales, which is 100% correct, so there will be a question of credibility. So how can we write on such heroes and maintain the credibility thing at the same time? This is my question, sir.
Bon, on n'a pas très bien compris parce qu'avec la sono, c'est pas terrible. Hein. Bon, enfin, je sais pas. Bon, je pense, d'après ce que me dit la traductrice, c'est que la question a été posée de savoir comment faire connaître les gens qui ont eu une certaine action, une certaine activité, qu'il appelle les héros de certains événements. Tout dépend quand ces événements se sont déroulés. Moi, ce que je travaille essentiellement sur l'aspect contemporain. C'est-à-dire, je ne suis pas remonté aux origines de l'Inde, je ne suis pas remonté à tout ce qui concerne le folklore, parce que j'ai entendu le mot folklore de l'Inde. Donc je ne sais pas quels sont les héros du folklore indien. Il faut seuls les gens qui sont en Inde, les gens qui avaient un certain bagage, qui ont travaillé sur les historiens qui étaient là à l'époque, parce qu'il y a quand même de très bons historiens en Inde. Il faut savoir que depuis les origines, il n'y avait pas que les étrangers, mais même beaucoup de pandits, beaucoup d'élèves, d'étudiants indiens allaient faire leurs études soit en Angleterre, soit dans les plus grandes écoles qui étaient en Inde. Donc ils ont un certain bagage et ils peuvent, eux, s'intéresser au folklore. Parce que le folklore, c'est quoi? C'est ce qui est raconté verbalement. Il n'y a pas d'écrit dans le folklore. Donc comment voulez-vous, moi je ne me mets pas à ma place, mais comment voulez-vous que des gens qui ont entendu des histoires, et chaque fois que vous allez d'un village à l'autre, l'histoire change, les gens n'ont pas la même façon de raconter une histoire, donc il y a toujours des modifications, ce qui explique peut-être que des gens qui avaient une certaine éducation, qui avaient de l'instruction, n'ont peut-être pas saisi l'importance du travail qui a été fait par ces héros, et n'a pas jugé utile d'en parler, ce qui n'est pas aussi normal. S'il y a des héros, j'allais dire des héros, s'il y a des héros dans certains secteurs, il faut en parler, il faut le justifier. The only name that I know is the Queen of Shanxi. That is the name I remember. I think she was also a lady who fight with Subhash Chandra Bose, no? No, with Subhash Chandra Bose? Oui. Non, c'est pas ça? Oui. Donc c'est le seul nom que je connais, la reine de Shanxi. Mais je ne connais pas l'histoire. Je sais que c'est une dame qui a combattu, qui a été très forte et qui a gagné beaucoup de batailles. Bon, après, je ne sais pas. Moi, je ne pourrais pas vous parler de ça. Pour le reste, qu'est-ce que je peux vous dire sur les folklores? C'est vrai qu'il y a des gens qu'on devrait évoquer, que je ne connais pas. Malheureusement, je ne sais pas. Moi, j'ai vécu en Inde jusqu'à l'âge de 20 ans. I want to tell you that all our family was settled in India 200 years before. We stayed 200 years in India. So I speak Tamil. We are teaching Tamil. We are teaching Bharatanatyam. We have also 3,000 of books on India for the students and for the members. That is Embassy Novel. But I don't know for the folklore people and the heroes of folklore. That I didn't. I can speak to you for the Second War, because I'm making a book on the Second War with Subhash Chandra Bose. That is important also for us. He's a good fighter.
Unfortunately, we didn't hear very well the questions, but from what I gather, you want to ask me questions about unsung heroes and past events. Of course, my answer would be it really depends on when you're talking about. I personally work on contemporary history. I don't focus my work on folk tales or the origins of India, and therefore I am not the right person to ask about the long history of India and folk. I know that there's a number of pundits, of intellectuals who studied both in England and in good universities in India, and I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons why there are so many unsung heroes is probably because intellectuals have tended to misjudge and to overlook such heroes in the past. I know about the Queen of Shanxi, who was a lady warrior, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not the specialist when it comes to that particular aspect. I agree that we should pay more attention to unsung heroes, and I just can only say that I lived in India until the age of 20 years old, and that my family lived in India for 200 years. Thank you.
No, we thank you for everything you have done. मेरा अगला सवाल सिद्धार्थ जी से है कि बार बार अभी बातचीत हुई, अभी डॉगलस सर ने भी बोला, विक्रम संपत जी ने कहा कि बायस के बारे में या आइडियोलॉजिकल हैंगओवर के बारे में. तो आइडियोलॉजिकल हैंगओवर से जब हम कुछ लिखते हैं, इतिहास लिखते हैं, तो उसका असर क्या होता है, ये मैं जानना चाहता हूं आपसे सिद्धार्थ शंकर गौतम जी.
हम अभी इस समय पेरिस में हैं एडोल्फ थियर्स यहाँ के बहुत बड़े इतिहासकार हुए हैं जिन्होंने 10 खंडों में फ्रांसीसी क्रांति को लिखा था। उनको बाद में एकेडमी में भी स्थान मिला। जो उन्होंने लिखा उसकी वैश्विक स्तर पर बहुत मान्यता हुई, लेकिन कुछ ब्रिटिशर्स ने उनके लेखन को भी अनबायस्ड मान लिया। हमारे यहाँ 1857 की जब भी बात होती है, सावरकर ने उसको क्रांति कहा। उसको नष्ट करने का पूरा प्रयास किया गया। यदि भगत सिंह नहीं होते और भगत सिंह ने उसको क्रांतिकारियों की गीता नहीं कहा होता उनके लेखन को, तो शायद हम जान भी नहीं पाते कि 1857 की क्रांति थी। मैं स्कूल में पढ़ता था, हमारी इतिहास की पुस्तकों में अकबर महान महाराणा प्रताप के साथ युद्ध किया, उसके बाद महाराणा प्रताप का कोई वर्णन नहीं, जबकि महाराणा प्रताप ने अंतिम युद्ध, जो बड़ा युद्ध उनके साथ हुआ, उसके बाद 80% अपना राज्य उनसे वापस भी लिया। बाजीराव पेशवा औरंगजेब के समय जितनी उनकी आयु नहीं थी उससे ज्यादा उन्होंने युद्ध लड़े और आज तक और कभी जीवन में अपना एक युद्ध भी नहीं हारा। अंतिम युद्ध भी लड़ते लड़ते ही वीरगति को प्राप्त हुए। उनके बारे में इतिहास कहाँ है? दरअसल इतिहास में विकृति तब आती है जब वो दरबारियों द्वारा लिखवाया जाए। यदि आप निष्पक्ष होकर इतिहास लिखेंगे और उस इतिहास में राष्ट्रीयता का भाव होगा, एक बोध होगा, एक सम्मान की भावना होगी कि हम अपने राष्ट्र के प्रति क्या भावना रखते हैं, वो इतिहास हमेशा बहुत अच्छा लिखा जाएगा। 1500 सालों से, मैं नाम ज्यादा नहीं लूंगा, लेकिन 1500 सालों से ये विकृति इतिहास में आ गई है। वो किसने की है पूरी दुनिया जानती है। वर्तमान में अब आवश्यकता इस चीज की है कि यदि इतिहास का पुनर्लेखन हो भी रहा है या किया जाना चाहिए, तो वो वास्तविकता लोगों को बतानी चाहिए कि उन्हें अपने अतीत पर गर्व हो सके। हमारा अतीत ऐसा ना बने कि हम उसको छाती से चिपकाए रहे और वो अतीत हमारे वर्तमान से लेकर हमारे भविष्य तक को बर्बाद कर दे। इतिहास लेखन वही सर्वश्रेष्ठ है जो राष्ट्रीयता की भावना से लिखा जाए।
It is true, Siddharth ji. Oh, sorry.
Donc sur l'histoire, en fait, si je donne l'exemple, ce qui était écrit sur la Révolution française, les Anglais, ils ont même dit que c'était pas crédible en fait. Donc n'importe quelle histoire, il y a toujours des gens qui veulent le questionner. Si je donne l'exemple de Savarkar qui avait appelé la révolution de 1857, c'était la seule qui avait dit que c'était une révolution. Après, la Bhagat Singh, il a parlé. Mais dans notre livre d'histoire scolaire, on nous apprend par exemple l'empereur Akbar le Grand. Par contre, on parle très peu de Maharana Pratap qui était aussi un roi qui était aussi célèbre qu'Akbar. Pareil, si on compare avec Bajirao Peshwa vis-à-vis Aurangzeb, on trouve beaucoup de descriptions d'Aurangzeb dans les livres, mais pas suffisamment de Bajirao Peshwa qui a gagné toutes les batailles, sauf le dernier où il s'est maîtrisé. Donc l'histoire est souvent déformée parce que c'est écrit par la cour, par le roi qui l'a commandite, et puis les gens qui écrivent en faveur du roi. Mais si l'histoire est écrite avec une vision de nation, une façon patriotisme, ça sera une vraie histoire. Je n'ai pas besoin de dire qui déforme l'histoire, ça fait depuis 1500 ans que l'histoire est écrite par certaines personnes. Et quand quelqu'un qui essaye de réécrire l'histoire, c'est toujours questionné. Donc il faut qu'il y ait une histoire qu'on peut être fier de notre passé et pas toujours être culpabilisé de ce qui était passé. Donc ce sera une vraie utilité d'avoir une histoire juste et correcte.
Yes, Siddharthji, as a student and even after my college, I also believed that Haldi Ghati, the war of Haldi Ghati, that was the last war which Maharana Pratap fought. And there was an impression in our mind that after that Maharana Pratap died. But the reality was that he lived and he got back the 80% of the area which he has lost to Akbar. So this is because of a biased history writing. My next question is to Vikram Sampath ji. He has written so many books on history. The most discussed is his book on Gauhar Jan on Binayak Damodar Savarkar. So when it comes to Binayak Damodar Savarkar, you know, there is always a criticism. And not just criticism. There was a hysteria of criticism by a certain lot, by a definite lot of self-fashioned intellectuals. And so my question is that Vikram Sampath ji, how do you counter or how do you reply to such hysteria of self-fashioned intellectuals by history writing? Vikram ji.
That's a good question, because I would have a slight disagreement with the fact that we need to write with a nationalistic perspective or with any kind of ideology. I think history needs to be written in the way it happened, the way it is, the way the documents talk to us, the way we see it, the historian, notwithstanding all the biases that I already mentioned right in my opening remarks. But the problem becomes when you write with this objective that you want to correct some wrong, or you want to write it with a perspective, with an ideology, left and right and nationalism and all these tools, then become impediments in my view when it comes to writing history. So for someone like Savarkar, that was the whole problem. For decades, particularly after independence, his story was held hostage by ideologically driven intellectuals whose whole idea was to demonize him, was to show him as a coward, a traitor, an accomplice in the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, all kinds of epithets which were used for contemporary politics to bash up his ideological successors who are in politics today, active politics. So that is the whole problem. So now to correct that, you don't rewrite history with a new ideological background, then the history gets further distorted. So to correct distortion, you don't have to create more distortions. I think the correction of distortion can only be rectified if you put the facts and the plain facts on the table, irrespective of whether they subscribe to your preconceived ideas of the subject or not, and let the readers make up their mind as to which way they would tilt. So I have attempted that in my 2 volumes on Savarkar, with almost 250 pages are only of the end notes and references and so on, which have been from archives at the British Library in London, in the archives in India, Marathi literature, which has not been hitherto accessed by several mainstream historians. So using that, the story is reconstructed, not with the idea that something has to be corrected or that something needs to be shown in a different light.
Yes, Vikramji. So whenever it came about Savarkar, discussing Savarkar, so I think historian is like a scientist, and history writing or historiography is like a science. So you cannot change the basic formula in physics, E is equal to mc square, or a plus b whole square is equal to a square plus b square plus 2ab in mathematics. So if you are having a hangover and you are a mathematician at the same time, you will change the formula. So writing history and with a hangover, with a biased mind, is like changing the E is equal to mc square. So when it comes to Savarkar, for an example I am telling, so there were 2 references which the historians with hangover or with biases must have referred to. One was the viewpoint of the Britishers, what they thought about Savarkar. And the second was the viewpoint of Mahatma Gandhi. And both these viewpoints cannot be countered. And Savarkar was a hero in both these viewpoints. So again, if you are a historian, and if writing history is a science, and if you have a bias, so you will end up in being a scientist or a physicist trying to change the formula is equal to mc square. Now we would like to invite questions from the audience. So anyone have questions? Yes.
Pushuratus. Hello, everyone. My name is Deepak. I'm living in Paris. My question, it's rather a small request. Can you talk a little bit about your book, Savarkar, 2 volumes that you have written? And maybe, if it's possible, the time permit, maybe talk about a small anecdote that you have mentioned in the book, or maybe read a small passage. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, so for the longest time after independence, the story of Savarkar has been either hidden from, the public narrative, or he's been presented in a manner, as I mentioned, someone who wrote mercy petitions to the British, who became a collaborator of the British, and also his implication, but later exonerated honorably from the Gandhi murder case as well. So all these tags were used to malign him in the manner in which his story was brought out to people. My idea was certainly not to correct any of this, and as I said, to set out a new narrative or any such thing. It was to find out the truth. History needs to be, as I said, that quest of truth, untainted by ideological moorings. You may have your ideologies, you may have your preferences, political affiliations or inclinations, but that should not color your journey of research and your reconstruction of the past to the maximum extent possible, in my view. Now, I took about 5 years to reconstruct his life, visiting numerous archives, numerous libraries across India, in other countries, including in Paris, because he spent a significant time in Paris as well. The revolutionary movement, particularly in the early 20th century, was deeply rooted in Europe, in cities like Paris and London. So we have actually an exhibit there of all the freedom fighters who were in Paris, including Shyamji Krishnavarma, Madam Bhikaji Kama, who was operating out of Paris, Virendranath Chattopadhyay, who also was from here, and he was Sarojini Naidu's brother, but a very, very active revolutionary, and Savarkar, who kept moving between London and Paris and so on. So all these places also became very important sources for my research. Regarding an anecdote, what comes to my mind immediately is, the complex relationship between Mahatma Gandhi and Savarkar. They were all the time ideological opponents to each other. They first met as young men in London at the India House where Savarkar was staying. And Gandhi comes from South Africa, and this is somewhere around 1906 or so. Savarkar is then cooking in the kitchen, and Gandhi goes to meet him there. And to his surprise, he sees a Chitpavan Brahmin actually cooking prawns. And Gandhi is quite alarmed by this. And Savarkar offers him those prawns to eat. And Gandhi says, no, I'm a pure vegetarian. So Savarkar is said to have quite derisively countered him, saying, this is just boiled fish. If you cannot eat this, how we want young men who can eat the British alive. So how would you actually have the guts to do that? And if we cannot eat together, how can we actually work together? So it was not the best of meetings for two men who met. And 2 years later, they again meet somewhere around 1909. They again meet in London at the India House. It is the Dashera celebrations, and all these young men are giving speeches. So first Gandhiji comes and talks something, and he says, I'm not going to talk anything political. I'm going to talk about the Ram Rajya and what the Ram Rajya is all about, and his whole philosophy of absolutist non-violence or ahimsa. And a few minutes later, Savarkar comes on stage and counters him, saying, we heard a lot about Ram Rajya, but even to establish Ram Rajya, Ram had to go to Lanka and kill Ravan. He had to use violence to kill Ravan. He didn't sit in a satyagraha in front of Ravan and said, please release Sita. So, and in all our Hindu devis and devatas, the gods and goddesses, are shown with weapons in their hands. These weapons are not for ornamentation. in the 9 days that the Dashera festival is celebrated, the Navratri, the Devi or the goddess is celebrated with, annihilation or destruction of asuras, the demons. And there is violence, there is bloodshed, there is gore, all of that there. So his whole question to Gandhi then was, if you consider the British Empire as evil, as demonic, then any means to annihilate it, any means to destroy it, including violence, is legitimate, because our Shastras allow us to do that. The Bhagavad Gita also says, if your opponent is also your own father, your uncle, your teacher, your elder, if he is on the side of adharma or non-righteousness, then please pick up the weapon and kill the person. Fight the person. So I think this was a fundamental disconnect between these two ideas of India in the run-up to the freedom struggle, where one was talking about an absolute ahimsa or absolute, non-violence, and the other one was talking about the fact that violence against evil is a very, very legitimate tool, though of course he also added that once India gets freedom, then there is no place for violence. So today the Naxals and the terrorists and all those who are in different parts of India, they invoke revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh and all of them. That is wrong according to him, where he said once a constitution comes into place, once there is a rule of law, once it's our own government, try to negotiate with them, try to overthrow them through the electoral battle, through ballots and not through bullets. But before that, when you have an alien government, the only way to get rid of them if they don't leave the country is violence is also a very legitimate means.
Yes, there were differences between Gandhi and Savarkar because they were opposed to each other ideologically. But if you go through the letters between Gandhi and Savarkar, so there was a put of, respect, a high level respect for each other. Gandhi ji referred to Savarkar as Bhai Savarkar. So there was a level of respect, a very high level of respect. So the next question.
This is for all the historians, definitely. We see Europe after the World War II, the borders were erased and now it's a European Union. But yet, living in France, I see the prominence or importance given to studying history until they come to the level of 11th or 12th or even the first year of degree. So history is a very, very important part of academics. And after World War II, what has happened, or before World War II, how Europe was, it still brought them together. And what would be your suggestion? We are rewriting history, we are bringing out Indian history, talking about colonialism or whatever invasions that has happened. What would be your message for the youth to how to look at history and yet be confident about their past, the present, and the future to forward?
So it comes down to the basic question of what is the objective of history. Is it, the role of a historian is not necessarily to stir up jingoism or even create pride and all of that. That's just incidental. But I think the fundamental role is to understand our past in the way we see it. Decolonization across the world, it's a very, very important stream. Latin America, Africa, even China and so on, who are doing decolonial studies, where you're breaking out of the colonial conditioning of your mind. Now, what was colonialism? It was occupation of another country using their raw materials for your products and also as a market for your finished goods, an economic subjugation, at the same time political subjugation, but a third dimension was cultural subjugation, where you occupy the colonized subject's mind and make them start feeling inferior about their own self. Like that famous Macaulay's Minutes of 1835, where he said the entire role of English education is to create a huge set of interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, who are only Indians in blood and color, but they are English in their morals, in their intellect, in their opinions, all of that. So somewhere that colonial hangover, which we spoke about earlier, that remains, and that manifests itself in all aspects of our learning, particularly history, because there too the colonial hangover that you are a nation of losers. You are a nation who has always been subjugated from outside, right from the Aryan invasion theory, which was mooted by German historians and others, and later perpetuated by the British and the Marxist historians. We are always told that you were ruled from outside. Our history lessons are like a long laundry list of battles that we lost, one after the other, right from the Battle of Tarain to the Battle of Panipat, Anglo-Mysore War, Anglo-Maratha War, Anglo-Sikh War. There doesn't seem to be a single war which we won. So where are those battles where we have won to? Where is the resistance that we have put? If we are around today as a civilization, there must have been some wars we won to. So those aspects, without, as I said, a very thin line between jingoism, chauvinism, at the same time, that whole sense of inward looking and pride towards your country, I think history needs to cultivate those aspects in a young child. When one looks at the history textbooks in India, unfortunately, these are written almost in third person. A young child who's reading this, it's almost she's reading the story of some other country and not of her own country. A negation of India's civilizational greatness or her contribution in various fields. It could be philosophy, linguistics, fine arts, architecture, sciences, metallurgy, mathematics. All of these are so underemphasized. A negation of India's cultural greatness, civilizational heritage that almost becomes like a fashion statement that, India was no good, we were no good. So that constant, you start looking down upon yourself, that has been ingrained in our minds over 250 years of British rule, and then not much changed after independence too. So now I think with this new education policy, which talks of all these correcting some of these wrongs, I hope and pray that it falls in the right hands, because again, it's very easy. History is so malleable that anybody can distort it in the way they want. And so if it falls in the wrong hands, you'll have a second round of distortion. And to correct that may take several more decades, and one generation will already be spoiled by then.
Hi, thank you everyone. I have a question to Vikram. Vikram, you were speaking about the fact that when you write about history, you should be devoid of biases. But I think it's very easier to say than do. So how do you do that? Did you get my question?
I heard it. I said we should try to the maximum extent possible, but it cannot be done completely. In my very opening remarks, I said the sources come with their own biases. The historian comes with his or her own biases. You can, to a large extent, try to reduce it, but no work of history can be completely unbiased. No work of history, as I said right at the beginning, can be the absolute and complete truth, or the most definitive account. These are all interim reports, and they need to be seen as just that.
Hello, my name is Shashi Dharmadikari from Maharashtra, France. Actually, I congratulate Vikram Sampath for his work for the Savarkar. And I would like to give this very small information, because what the work he has done, so we are carried out furthermore. Because many people must be knowing that Veer Savarkar was in Paris from January to March 1910, and he was living with Madame Kama. Then he wanted to go back because he was suggested to go back, and in July, before that one, in 1910, he was captured, put in jail, But he did a very brave move. When he was going back to India, he jumped from the boat. When the boat came near to Marseille, his fam came on the shore on Marseille, but unfortunately, the police or the gendarme who caught him, he didn't talk whatever, he didn't understand what he wanted to say. So he was put it back on the boat. So for this great Veer Savarkar, what we are doing now in Paris, we would like to have, we got 2 projects, and we are working with Indian Embassy. First project, where he was staying with Madame Kama, we'd like to put a board that he was staying there from January to March 1910. So there are a lot of formalities are there. We are working on it. But the second project is more important, and we are working with the Indian Embassy to put a monument or smarak in Marseille for his commemoration of July 1910. And how hope this project will come up. And this is thanks to Vikram Sampath, what he did for him. Thanks for our talking. Bye-bye.
Any more questions from the audience?
Hello, I'm Vinod Kumar. I'm been living in Paris for 6 years, but of course I closely follow what is happening in India. And I had all my education in India, and I can remember.
Sir, please.
Yeah.
Please put down the mask.
Oh, so is that better? Yeah, okay. So I had all my education in India, but I have been living for 46 years in France. The question I have is that during history education, however good or bad it was, we did hear lots of things about great battles fought by Prithviraj Chauhan, Muhammad Ghaznavi. He visited India, or he invaded India 17 times, and Timur Lenk also had tried. And then we always heard that Alexander was defeated. He has to go back from India because he was defeated by Porus. So I don't know, where are those great things? We are talking about only the Mughal and the British invasion, or whatever you can call it, but I think we also have the history in which there were lots of victorious things.
आप सवाल समझ
देखिए, ये बहुत बड़ा एक संकट रहा है। भारत के स्वर्णिम इतिहास को आप विक्रमादित्य, सम्राट अशोक, चाणक्य तक ऐसा पाएंगे कि वो पूरी दुनिया को राह दिखा रहा है, शासन चलाने से लेकर धर्म स्थापना तक। उसके बाद मुगल आए, हुमायूं से लेकर औरंगजेब तक। सभी के पास ऐसे दरबारी थे जिन्होंने मराठाओं को, राजपूतों को हमेशा एक तरह से दबा के रखा इतिहास के मामले में। वो उनसे हर बार मार खा के भागे जरूर, लेकिन अपने जीवन चरित्र में उसका कभी उन्होंने जिक्र नहीं करवाया। उसके बाद अंग्रेज आए, अंग्रेज उनसे और 2 कदम आगे बढ़ गए। अभी हम बात कर रहे हैं सावरकर की। जब 1857 की क्रांति को ही अंग्रेजों ने मानने से मना कर दिया और उस पूरी पुस्तक को नष्ट करने के कितने प्रयास किए। भगत सिंह नहीं होते तो वो पुस्तक यहाँ देखने को भी नहीं मिलती। 1857 की क्रांति हमें नहीं पता रहता कि क्या हुआ था उस समय, वो क्रांति थी। उसके बाद अंग्रेजों ने एक ऐसा तंत्र विकसित किया, बांटो, तोड़ो, राज करो। उसमें ये समय भी आया कि हमारे ही लोग ऐसा आरोप लगाने लगे जिन्होंने कभी लाठी नहीं खाई, जो कभी जेल में नहीं गए, वो अपने आप को भारत की आज़ादी में ऐसा मानते हैं कि उन्होंने हिस्सा लिया। ये लोग सवाल कौन उठाते हैं? ये वो सवाल उठा रहे हैं जो अंग्रेजों की मेहमान नवाजी नवाजते थे 5 स्टार होटल्स में बैठ के। इतिहास को विकृत किया गया और ये विकृत करने का क्रम सिर्फ 500 साल पुराना है, मुगलों से अंग्रेजों तक का। आप इसके पहले का इतिहास उठाएं, इससे पहले का इतिहास इतना स्वर्णिम है कि पूरी दुनिया को राह दिखाता है, पूरी दुनिया में कहीं नहीं है।
So sorry, thank you, I agree with you, that was exactly my point. And what
मैं इसमें आपको एक चीज और जोड़ देता हूँ। अभी 2 साल पहले भारत की नई शिक्षा नीति 1986 के बाद अभी वो लागू हुई है। उस शिक्षा नीति में यह प्रावधान किया गया है कि इतिहास का वही हिस्सा, वो सब स्वर्णिम काल हमारे बच्चों को पढ़ाया जाएगा जिससे हमें दूर रखा गया था, और इसका प्रावधान भी हुआ है और अब इस पर काम भी शुरू हो चुका है।
ठीक है। So that was exactly my point, because I didn't hear this in the discussion before I asked the question. Okay, so it is good that when we talk about history of India, we should talk about the whole history of India, not just whatever happened during last 500 years. Yeah.
Donc l'histoire de l'Inde, c'était en fait on parle très peu de l'âge d'or de l'Inde qui était l'époque de Vikramaditya, qui a défini le système d'administration, la religion, toute modernité qu'il avait apporté en fait. Ensuite on a eu des invasions mogholes, et en fait dans leur écrit ils ne parlent jamais des défaites qu'ils ont eues, ils ne parlent que des victoires, donc c'était déjà une histoire déformée. Et les Anglais qui sont allés encore une étape plus loin, ils ont nié la révolution de 1857. C'est grâce à Bhagat Singh qu'on sait qu'il y a une révolution. Puis tout le monde sait que la politique des Anglais c'était diviser pour régner. Donc ils ont continué ça, et aussi de déformer l'histoire en continu. Maintenant, avec la nouvelle politique d'éducation que l'Inde est en train de mettre en œuvre, c'est enseigner aussi l'âge d'or de l'Inde, qui les gens ils sont presque oubliés, et c'est très important que les enfants ils apprennent aussi que l'Inde était une grande civilisation avant d'arriver des Mongols et les Anglais.
Any last question, or we will conclude now? So let's.
Hi, my name is Rashmi, and my question is, why there are so many, so less women historians in India? Women historians.
It's probably the other way around. There are less men. There are lots and lots of women who are historians in India.
Before we conclude the session, I'll just, Douglas sir, the present government in India, they are very serious about history. They are very serious about museums. So in India, there are very less number of museums. But the idea of our Prime Minister is that every district should have a museum. So 75 young authors aged from 14 to 25, 25, they have been given scholarship, they have been encouraged, they have been given training, and very soon they are coming up with 75 history books on those heroes, those who were unsung or unclaimed. Again, the tribal heroes, like when we talk about 1857, we often mistake by saying that 1857 was the first war of Indian independence. It was not. There was Bhagwan Birsa Munda in 1890 in Jharkhand. There was Sidhu Kanhu, there's many others. And many tribal leaders. Those who were fighting British tooth and nail. So, the museums include these tribal heroes. The books, those who are coming, include these tribal, they are based on the tribal heroes. So the government is very focused. And we don't, officially we don't say anywhere that 1857 was the first war of Indian independence. From the very first day the Britishers came or the Mughals came, each and every day was a war from them. And a single part of India, or in different parts of India, there was a rebellion 24 into 7, 365 days. The colony was never absolute. So now we conclude the session. Thank you so much. Any more question? We are concluding now. We can conclude now. Okay. So thank you, Douglas sir, for such a wonderful book. Thank you, Siddharth Shankar Gautam ji. Thank you. Thank you, Vikram Sampath ji. And thank you to both our translators, wonderful translators. And thank you for being such a patient audience. Thank you so much.
Yes, ready. One more time. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think I can take my